classes, all sorts of fun stuff that can be found at our website at politics-prose.com. Before we get started today, if everyone could just check their cell phones or beepers or Tamagotchis or anything that could make a sound partway just to make sure it's on silent, it'd be much appreciated. Masks are optional, but it is the season for all sorts of colds, so if you would like one but don't have one, raise your hand. We can get one to you. We are doing an audio recording tonight, so when it's time for the Q&A, we do ask that you come up to the microphone to ask your question over there. You can just line up nicely by this white column. After the Q&A, we will have a signing line. You'll be able to buy one of the books from our lovely booksellers up at the front counter. They're all stashed away back there. And then once again, you'll line up at this white pillar and we will get your book signed for you. We'll also ask that you fold up your chairs just to give us a hand at the end of the night. But don't worry, I'll remind you of all of this again at the end. So, without further ado, I'm so excited to introduce Bushra Rehman in celebration of her book, Roses in the Mouth of a Lion. This novel follows Razia Mirza as she grows up amid the wild grape vines and backyard sunflowers of Corona, Queens. When Razia is accepted into Stuyvesant, a prestigious high school in Manhattan, the gulf between the person she is and the daughter her parents want her to be widens. At the school, Razia meets Angela and is attracted to her in a way that blossoms into a new understanding. When their relationship is discovered by an auntie in the community, Razia must choose between her family and her own future. Punctuated by both joy and loss, full of 80s music and beloved novels, Roses in the Mouth of a Lion is a new classic, a fiercely compassionate coming-of-age story of a girl struggling to reconcile her heritage and faith with her desire to be true to herself. Bushra Rehman grew up in Corona, Queens. She is the co-editor of Colonize This, Young Women of Color on Today's Feminism, and author of the poetry collection Mariana's Beauty Salon and the dark comedy Corona, one of the New York Public Library's favorite books about NYC. Rehman will be in conversation with Jeffrey Dale Lofton. Jeffrey Dale Lofton hails from Warm Springs, Georgia, and is a senior advisor at the Library of Congress. He's the author of Red Clay Susie, which was longlisted for the Center for Fiction 2023 First Novel Prize and was awarded the Seven Hills Literary Prize for Fiction. It will also be out in paperback on March 5th, 2024. Please join me in welcoming Bushra and Jeffrey to the stage.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. This is a beautiful audience. I don't come to DC often. This is maybe the second time in 20 years that I've been here. So thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Politics and Prose, for this invitation. And, being in DC, I just felt that I really wanted to start with the work of Rifat Alarir. I went to his vigil in New York a few weeks ago. Those of you who don't know, Rifat was a Palestinian poet, activist, educator, who was assassinated on December 6th in Gaza. And you may have heard this poem before, but please allow me to read it again. It's called If I Must Die. If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made fly, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. Thank you for letting me read that. And we're gonna start, and I'm so happy to talk to Jeffrey. It was wonderful. Yay, Jeffrey, take it away.
Thank you, Bushra. I have to say I could not be more honored, more filled with purpose to be here to help you introduce your tender, beautiful, compelling novel with all of these people who love the written and the spoken word so much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Politics and Prose, and thank you, Bushra, for being here and letting me be here with you. My first question is, why did you elect to start our time together by reading the work of another writer?
Well, I mean, this moment, as we know what is happening in Palestine, being in DC, being an American who feels complicit in what's happening because my tax dollars are being used for this genocide. And I just felt that it was important. And also, you know, as a writer, as a poet, and especially a New Yorker, I've always been in conversation with Palestinian writers. You know, I've always been in conversation with Palestinian poets, Palestinian literature. And as a Muslim person, I've always been aware of what's been happening in Palestine. When I was a teenager, I used to go to Human Rights Watch offices in Midtown Manhattan and get information. I used to go to the UN and get information and try to write reports about it in high school, and no one ever believed me. And, you know, I feel like we're in a different moment right now in history. So I thought it was important to start with Rafat's work.
Well, you know, we are at Politics and Prose, a storied institution in Washington, D.C., and with, you know, with your, I mean, I can't think of a better venue for you to exercise your activism than at Politics and Prose during this trip to D.C. In 20 years, maybe. You know, I noticed social media post from you just this weekend. And I actually wrote it down, and I want to read it.
Okay.
And I think it really ties in to what you just said. You wrote, "Writing of Muslim American families and communities inside the belly of this beast is an act of faith and revolution. I'm done with any lesser writing about us." Tell us more about this profound love and this, it's really a rebellion, and how that love manifests itself.
Yeah, I will definitely talk about that, and I also want to talk about how we met.
Okay.
And how this whole event happened, and this invitation. You know, when I think, you know, being a Muslim American, I know that the way that we are shown in everywhere is often very limited, very two-dimensional or one-dimensional, and the place of literature is to add dimension, is to, you know, not that it is our job to humanize our people, but it can be a function of literature. And I think that there was a New York Times reviewer who wrote that they were pleasantly surprised by the dimensional characters in the book, because I think it's a rare thing to have a community where you have like 20 aunties and each of them is completely different than the other. Every single person is following a different path. You know, so it was important for me to write a book like that, and I'm happy that people are noticing that. I mean, I think sometimes the way the book is written about, it's just it still isn't written that way. So I think there's some reviews of it that don't quite capture what it's about. So I do recommend reading it and making your own judgments. And I want to say that, you know, thank you for letting me you know, bring this all together at Politics and Prose. We met just 6 months ago at a literary festival, and it was an instant kind of family, an instant connection. And I think that as queer people, that is something that happens for us, where you meet someone and you're like, oh, your family. And it was just this instant thing. And so when Jeffrey said, hey, I'd like you to come, I mean, none of this, we planned this months ago, way before October. And now it's like one of the only bookstores on the tour, because there is no tour really. This is it. This is the tour tonight. But yeah, no, I think that so I'm really grateful, and I think it does take allyship. You know, it takes all kinds of allyship for positive change in the world.
Well, you know, we're fam, as I say, and it felt that way immediately. It was one of the meeting you has been one of the joys of this past year, one of the great joys of this past year. But, you know, I'm really interested, you started to go in a particular direction. This sort of queer community and the diversity in the queer community. You know, we don't always look alike. We don't always sound alike. We don't always think alike. We don't have the same ethnic fabric as our makeup. What about that? What about the diversity of the queer community intrigues you, and why do you look to that as a source of connection and family?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what the queer, because of the diversity, the queer community can teach us that you can be family and love and have friendships in which you come from different places. You know, you come from different places. You may have different views, different class backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, and yet you can be united on a certain understanding that we should all be free to love who we want to love, you know, that you can be united on that. And then there's also this way that I feel like being queer is you can see through the matrix, you know, you, especially when we, you know, we're more similar in age, like when we were young, we might not have known why we were different, you know. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. Like, everyone was in the closet. George Michael was in the closet. You know, Whitney Houston was in the closet. Like, all of our role models were in the closet, you know? And we didn't understand, like, why do I feel different? What is it about me? But because you felt different, because I felt different, maybe you felt different, we could see everything around us with this eye of like, why is everyone behaving that way? You know, why is everyone acting like that? I don't understand. I don't get it. And so you immediately are this outsider that can be a social justice warrior because you are seeing things from the outside. And I think that the queer community has that power and potential to always be that in the world. And they often are. And we know that that's not everybody, right? But there is that potential that's there.
You mentioned George Michael and Whitney Houston being in the closet in the 80s. Well, they're in the book now. They're in
Yes.
they're in Roses in the Mouth of a Lion. So if you missed them, that's where you can find them. But it sounds like you're saying that books can give us sort of gives us a roadmap or a sort of a new version of what that community, what that family can be, what that connection can be. It's a blueprint for what it can be.
Right.
And that's important for to have that map that we didn't have before, you know, 20, 40, 30 years ago,
Yeah.
2 years ago, not that long ago.
Right.
But yeah, you know,
Something worth fighting for.
something worth fighting for, yeah, something worth writing,
Yeah.
something worth reading.
Mm-hmm.
So you've written quite a bit. You've written, and I brought a few with me. You've you've written a book of poetry, Mariana's Beauty Salon. The story collection Corona, and of course your novel Roses in the Mouth of a Lion, and there's, I believe, a sequel in the works
Yes.
to Roses.
Yes.
So you've written so many genres. And you've been writing for quite a while. I really am interested to know how you got from being a poet to being a novelist. I'm curious to know how you navigated that journey.
Yeah. Well, we were joking about dinner that because the book is getting a wonderful reviews, that I'm an overnight success that took 20 years to be. But yeah, no, I think that so poetry is such a democratic form because all you need is a pencil and a paper. You just need a little bit of time, and you need your heart. So I feel like anyone can write poetry. So when I was young, I was definitely one of those teenagers who was like scribbling away poetry in my journal. Poetry was a container for me to put all the things that I couldn't tell anyone, all the feelings that felt threatening to myself and to others, my sadness, my depression, my rage, everything would go into a poem. But I remember the moment, like, I just went from journaling to poetry writing, and it felt different, right? I wasn't just venting, but I was creating. I was making something. I was making something that was outside of my pain because there was a creative impulse there to try to make something beautiful, and I think that so much of writing, and for those of us who write personal narratives, is taking the pain and the ugliness and transforming it through language into something beautiful, and via that transformation we heal ourselves, and we provide, again, maps and blueprints for other people to transform their pain. So I remember being young and discovering that, and then because I grew up in New York City, and it was the 90s, there was a whole spoken word movement was happening, and so I started just getting on a mic at clubs, at bars, at other places, and reading poetry, and then connecting to people. And as writers, we're thought of as being like lonely in a room, but really we're we need this. We need the audience. We need the connection. And so when you are when you're a spoken word person, you are directly connecting to people in the moment. And at that time, there was no social media. So spoken word stages were the place that mostly like BIPOC, primarily BIPOC young writers could express their views and their opinions. And so they were very political spaces. But I would often share stories in between the poems, and the stories got longer and longer and longer until I realized I needed to start writing fiction as well.
Well, you know, I mean, even if I didn't know that you had written a book of poetry, Mariana's Beauty Salon, I would have known that you were a poet because, I mean, your writing is that, it's melodic. It's just, you use the word beautiful, maybe about something else, but it's beautiful. And so but it's such a visual, poetry can be so visual as well. There's the beginning of one of the chapters in Roses, and it's the word railroad track, run together maybe 5 or 6, 7 times. It's across the top of the page. And right below it are the names of Razia's, the protagonist, friends. Their names are typed underneath this long sentence. And their names are typed in relation to that track. And that's where their houses are, in relation to the train track in the community. And you didn't tell us anything. You showed us. It just took my breath. It was just so simple, but so poetic.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
yeah.
You know, for many of us teachers, you know, there's the classic where I'm from poems, right? Like we ask our students to write where I'm from poems. We write where I'm from poems. And I was once teaching a group of teenagers because I always teach. I love teaching writing. And I started to write a where I'm from poem, and I started writing about my neighborhood in Corona, and so many memories came back. Like I was like, right, we used to like live next to the railroad tracks. Like we were like from the wrong side of the railroad track. We were like literally on the railroad tracks, you know? And so all these memories started pouring back in, and I think it was then the book just started coming out as I was writing these where I'm from poems with my students. And, you know, my neighborhood is an under-resourced neighborhood in Queens. You know, people don't go there very much, you know, and I wanted to, again, use language to show the beauty of this place where I grew up until I was 16. So basically from when I was a baby to when I was 16, I grew up there.
So words, poetry, writing can be beautiful, but I remember we were chatting the other day on the telephone, and something stuck in my head. It's been stuck in the cerebral cortex. I hope that's what it is. I hope it's nothing else. But something you said has been with me, and you wrote, poetry is dangerous. So it's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. Would you care to elaborate on that statement?
Yeah, I mean, and thank you, everyone. There's like people, you know, I mean, Rafat Alarir was targeted and assassinated, and he taught poetry. You know, Mosab Abu Toha, who wrote an incredible article this week, and you should definitely follow Mosab Abu Toha, is another Gazan poet. You know, poets are seen as dangerous because one thing is we witness, you know, and we don't lose our hearts and our humanity. We share our true feelings. We hold up a mirror to the world, and we connect with people. And all those things are dangerous when you are trying to dehumanize people, and when you're trying to, and I don't just mean that Palestinians are being dehumanized. I think that the soldiers who are hurting them are losing their humanity. You know, I feel like you can stay in touch with your humanity by writing, by making art of any form. You know, and it was Kurt Vonnegut who said this too. Someone once asked him to give advice on writing, and he said, do any form of art, painting, drawing, because that is how you save your soul, you know? So I don't think art has to become a career. It's just something we should all do to stay in touch with our souls, because whatever we think a soul is, once we lose it, anything, terrible things can happen, you know?
And you're an educator as well. Given the value on certain parts of the formal education system, do you have any, what are your thoughts on, you know, art in the school, art in education?
So I worked at an organization that was created by June Jordan and Kenneth Koch and other poets who saw that all arts funding in New York City public schools, which I am a proud graduate of under-resourced New York City public schools, all the arts funding had been cut. And so these poets like June Jordan and Kenneth Koch said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to pay poets a certain amount to just go into the schools and teach poetry to the children. And I actually think it was a poet that came into my school that did that. And I do remember that. I don't remember who that poet was, but I remember that happening. And so for about almost 20 years, I taught with Teachers and Writers Collaborative. I taught at Urban Word NYC, which is a spoken word program for teenagers in New York City. And we just taught poetry. And I think that artists shouldn't have to supplement an arts education that everyone should have access to. But I find that as artists, we can push in sometimes to schools and do that.
Were you already writing when that poet came to your school, or did that spark
No, I was in elementary school, and I remember learning that poems don't have to rhyme. And that was like real big deal for me. And yeah.
Was
I was
that
like, oh, then I can do this, you know.
Was that part of was that the catalyst for you to put pen to paper and start writing?
I did. You know what? There was a time when my family, I didn't go to school for a year. It's kind of complicated, but I didn't go to school for a year. And I was keeping myself entertained by writing poetry. So that was like in 7th grade, or what would have been 7th grade. And so I kept myself entertained that way. And that's when I started writing poetry.
Did anyone suggest that, or was it just something that came naturally to you?
No, I just started to do that.
What an exceptional child.
Oh.
Wow. We were talking about danger, and beauty in writing, but, Roses is it's inspired by true events, not unlike my own novel. And I found sort of traversing that ground between the truth and fiction to be a minefield. And I'm wondering about your experience and really, I guess what I'm asking is, what was it like to write that story, your story, and then to have the book in the world, the book inspired by your life?
Yeah. Well, and I'll say that the way that I met Jeffrey too is I was on a book signing line for Jeffrey's book, Red Clay Susie.
Okay, if you're going to embarrass me, let me do it myself.
No, I'm not. To me, it's not embarrassing though.
It was embarrassing.
Oh, I was with one of my best friends, and we heard Jeffrey speak about writing and life, and we were like, we have to get his book. We're gonna get one book. We're only allowed one book each, But both of us were like, but we both want that one. So I'm like, okay, we'll both get it. And we were on the line, and you can continue if it's embarrassing.
So you're at the book signing line, and people come up, and you say hello, how are you, blah blah blah. And I love to ask people if they write or if they're writers, because everybody writes, and people will sometimes say, well, I'm kind of trying. I said, you're a writer. If you're writing, you're a writer. Yes. And so Bushra came up, and I had read Roses in the Mouth of a Lion, and I knew that the author of that book was there because I'd seen the book on the table, and I just I didn't pay attention to the photograph and the cover. And I said, oh, are you a writer? I said, yes, I'm a writer. I said, oh, what do you write? And she said, oh, I wrote a book called Roses in the Mouth of a Lion. And I said, oh my God. And I got up and I went around the table and we hugged, because I recognized the book. I recognized what her heart had poured into a page, but I didn't recognize her. And
it's the benefit of being a writer that people don't.
I kind of embarrassed myself.
Well, no, we do that. But I was telling Jeffrey that I do that all the time. I used to be in the entourage of this famous DJ, and my job in the entourage was to never recognize the famous people and embarrass my friend every single time. That was my job in the entourage. So we write about real life, and I think that's what we recognize in each other was. So one thing about writing, why write about real life? Well, one thing is I felt that my Pakistani-American communities and lives had not been written about enough, not from a Pakistani perspective. I wanted to write about a queer Pakistani story that hadn't been written about. I wanted to write about a person who is spiritual and religious and queer, that it wasn't a choice of one thing or another. And so I that's why I chose to write based on true events. But once I started writing, it's not a memoir. I don't have such a great memory. I do have a wild imagination. I do a lot of Bushra-isms, which are just exaggerations and things like that. So I decided to go with fiction, and but some of the characters are based on real people, and one of them is my father, who passed away before the book came out, and I feel that there is a way that his memory is now in the book. Like he's very much, if you've read the book, he's very much like that father in the book. A beautiful, generous, kind Muslim man, who loves his family, and again, who a lot of people are now seeing, on the news, seeing that, oh my God, look at these Palestinian men saving babies and trying to cheer them up and all the innocence. But those are the Muslim men that I knew growing up. So I think that there's something about wanting to honor people by writing true stories, Jewish stories.
Did your father get a chance to read Roses?
I don't think he did.
He would have been proud.
No. Well, I don't know about that, but
I think, from what you've told me, he would have understood and been proud.
What I feel, and I don't know if other people feel this about people who've passed away, is you can still have conversations with them, whether you're imagining it or not. But I feel like since he's passed, I've had conversations with him about the book, and they probably might be even more open than they might have been in real life.
Good. So enough preamble. We've talked a little bit about it. Would you mind reading a passage from Roses for us?
Yes.
By the way, if you close your eyes and listen, it'll be a lot like listening to the audiobook version, because Bushra is the narrator for the audiobook version of Roses. So I'm going to step over here.
Okay, I'm going to read a little bit. And I think there's some chairs here for people who are standing, or I know it's hard to stand for so long. So while I get up here, I thought that I would read a part of the book that takes place in a bookstore, because, again, thank you to Politics and Prose and everyone and the staff here for being so welcoming, because bookstores are radical, incredible. What am I doing? I've got two mics. I'm just so used to the spoken wordy thing. Bookstores are amazing, and I mostly have worked at many bookstores. That's one way I've always made a living, with my 20 years of overnight success. And one of the bookstores I worked at was the Strand Bookstore in New York City. And as some of you may know, Ben McFall was an iconic bookseller who passed away about 2 years ago now. And he was one of my queer mentors. So when I worked there, I was in my early 20s, and I think he immediately recognized me and mentored me and always inspired me to write. And so he's a character in this book, and he'll be a bigger character in the sequel. So at this place in the book, Razia, who is having a secret relationship with a young girl named Angela at her high school, Angela hasn't told her family. Razia has not told her family. It's the 80s, so they're also not telling anyone in their high school. They're very closeted, but they hang out at the Strand bookstore. So one day, Angela said she wanted to take me somewhere special. We walked down Broadway to the Strand, where barricades of books lined the sidewalk. As soon as I walked in, I sneezed. The Strand is much more dusty than this place. There were piles and piles of books about to topple over, and a buzz of quiet excitement, of discovery. Book clerks rushed about, some wearing glasses, some nose rings, many with brightly dyed hair, purple or green. I thought of Eliza's small bookshelf. Even the Corona Library had less books than this. Angela squeezed my hand. I want to get this book for us. Even cowgirls get the blues. It's about these two girls who fall in love. That was our main literature at that time. I read about it in 17. She disappeared into the stacks on a treasure hunt, leaving me behind. I tried to get the attention of the book clerks, but they all buzzed by, ignoring me. Oh, don't mind them. They all think they're writing the next great American novel. They can't stoop to help anyone. Can I help you find something? One of the clerks was talking to me. I turned to see a handsome man with a gold earring in his left ear. Gray threaded through his full beard. He pulled down his reading glasses and looked me up and down, taking my measure. His name tag said, "Ben, ask me." So I asked, "My friend is looking for this book, Even Cowgirls Get the Blues?" A smile moved across his lips. "Your friend?" I blushed. He turned and started walking to the back of the store. Well, he said, then knowing I wasn't following him, commanded, follow me. He brought me to the fiction section and began to whisper to himself, yes, this and a little bit of this. He was barely looking at the shelves, just pulling books down. He handed me a stack. You don't have to buy them, he said, but you should read them. He had given me Bastard Out of Carolina, Song of Solomon, and even Cowgirls Get the Blues. And if you can handle it, he placed one more book in my hands, Close to the Knives. It's a memoir, but it ended up in fiction. These clerks are charming but distracted. He gave a loving but frustrated look at one of the clerks walking by David Wojnarowicz, a gorgeous artist. He died too soon. I looked at the cover, a black and white photograph of buffalo running off a cliff. How did he die? AIDS? A chill went through me. I remembered the day Julio and I had seen Mr. Nichols crying when Julio had crumbled in the hallway. Ben leaned in and whispered, 75% of the staff here died. He tilted his head to a tall, thin man in the art section. He looked up at us and smiled. Only Robert and I survived. Robert used to say, Ben, everyone's going to think we were boring. He laughed and I couldn't help but smile. He looked at me closely. Where did you come from? You're like a bear cub lost in the wilderness. Queens? Oh, that makes sense. How did you... I didn't know how to finish the sentence. Live? I just never got sick. With a wave of his hand, he walked away to help someone else. Let me know what you think of the books. Angela found me, standing in place, looking through them. I found even Cowgirls at the Blues, I said to her. I mean, someone helped me. I looked around, but Ben had disappeared into the piles of books. Angela insisted on buying everything. My dad doubled my allowance. This parents competing for my love thing is really working out. Now, let's go to the Waverly and get some hot chocolate. We just have to head to the village. Aren't we in the village? My unfamiliarity with city geography made Angela laugh. This is the East Village. I'm taking you to the West Village. We walked cross down through cobblestone streets. After the black and gray of the East Village, I had to blink my eyes with wonder. I felt as if I was Dorothy entering the land of Oz. There were rainbows everywhere, gay couples holding hands in the open. Angela's hand was trembling as she reached for mine. I pulled her toward me, feeling as if I'd become divine. Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know what happens next. Do we
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna. I have one more question, and then
okay.
I think we can turn it over to Q&A.
Okay.
But I wanted to thank you for reading that for us. So, Razia's queer awakening happens. It's very gradual, and it happens very late in your book, but yet it doesn't feel like a revelation too late. It's still compelling. The storyline pulls you along. How did you manage that, and why did you do it that way?
Yeah, I think, well, first being bisexual, omnisexual, there's a delay in realization of being queer. And then also there was so much repression of sexuality, whether it was from my culture or it being the 80s or, in terms of queer sexuality. And I also think, and we were chatting about this, that I know we kept having these conversations and we're like, save it for the day. But we were chatting about how, like, with young women, it's so possible to be intimate in ways that I think young men are not allowed. We can have sleepovers and it's just, you're just gonna sleep in each other's bed. We play with each other's hair. We're very touchy. We have passionate best friendships. And I think for me, that's what it was a lot of passionate best friendships. And to not understand that I was in love with these people, and why would I hate it when they got a boyfriend and get so mad and fight with them and, but because I think that's why sometimes it takes longer where unfortunately, young men aren't allowed that same kind of ability to just be intimate and close. It's not in this culture. We were talking about how in Pakistan it's very homosocial and men walk down the street holding hands and no one blinks, and but then it's also against the law. It's also against the law. So just these ways that queerness has always been with us, and people have always tried to stamp it down, and just God, how wonderful it would be and how much freer we would all be, if we could just allow ourselves to be who we are.
And allow each other.
And allow each other to be who we are. Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, we are open to audience questions.
If not, I got plenty more questions, but.
And I
Okay,
love looking
could you
out
come
at
up
everyone.
to the
It's
microphone?
so
Got the recording.
wonderful.
And that will capture it.
Sort of following through on what you just said, and also sort of for Jeffrey, because I've
Hi,
read
Lee.
Red Clay Susie. I mean, given the time period that you set your story in, and also given the heritage that you're sort of addressing with a little bit more of a closed culture for that, and your experience growing up in a little bit of a different era where homosexuality was not as forthcoming as today. But given that life has changed so much now, and that it's so much more, we're so much more progressive and open, what kind of a message do you think your stories and your personal developments gives to people today in a little bit more of an open culture? What kind of a message do you think carries through and sort of pushes on from that? Because they're both really compelling, super compelling stories. So I'm not trying to dismiss that. I'm just trying to see how you guys see it kind of fitting in. Because the struggles are still there, but just from your perspective.
Yeah. Shall I start, and then if you?
Please.
I mean, I sometimes feel like I live in a bubble in which it does feel like there's been progress, but all the people who write to me and talk to me about it say that their struggles are almost exactly the same. Like, they're still afraid to come out to their families. They're still afraid of disappointing them. They're still afraid of letting people in their high school know or their college know. And also, as we know, we are in the midst of an intense backlash in this country against all queer literature. And Scholastic makes it possible for children to not, I mean, in terms of like the Scholastic book fair that we would get so excited to buy books, like it is possible for them to not show queer literature at some schools if that is what the school doesn't want. I mean, librarians are fighting this battle. But what I have always learned, and I learned this from the feminist movement, is like it's 2 step forwards, 1 step back. And when I feel sometimes the intensity of this backlash is because of the progress that we've made. I don't think that we are in the promised land of acceptance yet. So I think that there's always going to be room for stories like Jeffrey's and mine. Hopefully not forever, but now. What do you think, Jeffrey?
Well, I actually have distilled my answer to that the version of that question over the year or two. I really think of my book as an example of you don't have to be perfect to be happy. To be worthy of happiness, you don't have to have everything together. You don't have to be society's idea of perfection, because it doesn't exist, for one thing. But I think it's almost the opposite of the cultures you were talking about. You know, it's not illegal here to be homosexual, but in society, it's not fully accepted. I wish I had counted the number of young queer people who've come up to me at bookstores and book festivals and just, may I have a hug, and just cry in my arms because they have not felt safe to tell their families and their friends who they are. And this is not always in small communities. These are sometimes big cities. So there's a need for people to speak their truths, to be their authentic selves, to show examples of, you're not alone. Because I always thought I was alone. And
Same.
I ain't young, so.
Yeah. Hello.
Hi.
Full disclosure, I am Jeffrey's partner and his publicist. So I know from looking at this from the inside that Jeffrey was petrified that of his family's reaction to Red Clay Susie when it was out there for them to see. He would not let anyone in his family see a draft, so it all happened kind of at once. And so my question, Bushra, for you is, I know you have 5 siblings, is that right?
Yes, I'm one of 6. So
One of
yes.
6. How have they reacted to this lovely, wonderful, and I think revealing book of yours?
It's thank you for that question. And so it's interesting. Like, I have been disowned so many times from my family that I I see disownment as a revolving door at this point rather than it slams. I didn't know that when I was young. Like when I was very young, I was like, oh my God, I'm never going to see my family again. So now I feel that I knew that there would be a strong response to the book. But you know what's interesting is that, and my mother has listened to the audiobook too, and I feel that because the book is about, like you were saying, the queerness comes towards the end. Up until that point, it's all memories of Queens, memories of our Muslim community, all the people we grew up with. And so I think that the book is such a celebration of that community that they couldn't help but also recognize that and couldn't help but see, like, feel seen by that part of it. I have a friend, he's like a cis man, Pakistani dude, and he was like straight, and he was like, I feel so seen by your book. And I think it's because there's so many Pakistani references in there, and so many like inside jokes and the language and just things that people have never seen in a book before about our culture, that they couldn't help but like that part. And you know, some of them didn't talk to me for like a year, but come this holiday, I was with them, you know, but it was a rough year, you know, but I kind of waited it out. It was painful, but I'd been there before. And I do think that it's and I tell this to my writing students, it's so important to have an alternative family. You have to have a chosen family, alternative family, because when your bio family turns their back on you, and even if they're doing it temporarily, it's very painful, and you need to have a chosen family that will then, you know, not turn their back on you.
We're part of yours.
Yes, I'm so happy about that.
Hi, Martha.
Thank you so
Hello.
much for this. I wondered if you could talk to us about your literary foremothers and sort of who are your influences. Thank you.
Yeah, and also feel free to join me. I mean, God, there's so many. I mean, this book is so heavily influenced by Betty Smith, who wrote A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I mean, it's most definitely an homage to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I read that book when I was very young, and I remember it was the first time I had seen a child deal with outer borough poverty in a way that I had dealt with, to deal with that kind of world of, you know, the outer boroughs, Brooklyn, Queens. And I just loved A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I read it over and over and over. And there's chapters in here that are direct homages to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. There's one chapter where the children are collecting cans for recycling. And that's how A Tree Grows in Brooklyn starts, you know. Audre Lorde, definitely reading Audre Lorde over and over. Adrienne Rich, those were the people that I read and could and still read over and over again. And I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for these writers, for these brave writers. Definitely them. Another question?
Any other question?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question for both of you, since both of your books are, inspired by your life, but kind of in the novel fiction genre. When did you know that that's what you were doing? That you wouldn't? Did you know before you started writing about your life that you would kind of fictionalize it, or did that come through the writing process?
Do you want to answer first?
I'll go first. So I started writing my novel soon after I left home to go to college many years ago, and I had pushed down years of frustration, humiliation, and anger and fear from being bullied and body shamed from members of my family. It was the first time I was away from them. So as a natural instinct, I started to journal and write all of this down. And I was actually, I didn't know it at the time, but I was writing a novel. Coursework got in the way. I put it away for many years. Several years ago, fast forward to just a few years ago, I read 2 books in succession. I reread To Kill a Mockingbird. I had read it as probably a teenager, but reading it as an adult was a very different experience. And I recognized an outsider child that I didn't fully understand when I was younger. And then the next week I read Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman. And those 2 books together sparked something, and I caught on fire. and I was a teenager again, dealing with all of what I had pressed down inside of me again throughout my life. And I pulled out those journals and started reading them. I said, I've got to finish this story. So I was sort of on the, I actually didn't have a process to write, but I found myself on the train going to and from my job at the Library of Congress. And I'd make notes on my mobile phone. And I found that I was actually starting to write the book. And I finished the first draft of the book on my mobile phone on the metro. And it was at some point halfway through, I thought, I think this is a book. I started writing it for myself. I finished it for at-risk youth who are maybe not going to make it. That's why I finished it. And that's why I decided that part of the proceeds would go to, would donate the part of the proceeds to the Trevor Project and the Born This Way Foundation to save some kids, to help them support the important work they do. That's when I knew.
And I'm so glad you did write your book and share it with us. I think, that makes me think of, and I will come to your question too, that when people say, well, aren't you afraid of what your aunties are going to say, your uncles are going to say? And I was like, there's kids who are dying. I don't care what my auntie is saying.
14% of queer kids attempted suicide last year.
Yeah, and I was like, that's who I care about. That's who, not about some people who are sitting around gossiping about what a bad child I am. And that's the benefit of getting older. I mean, I do think getting older, I can say that now, that I care less. Although I so didn't fit in that it would have been impossible to ever even try to fit in. So I always wanted to write a novel, but it wasn't easy. And the poems were how I first started exploring the material. So a lot of the poems, if you read them, are like directly connected to the novel because I was trying to explore the material through poetry first. And to write a novel, you need focused time, but it is true that you can find it in small spurts, like in your commute. I also wrote on the subway a lot. I was a high school teacher in Queens, but living in Brooklyn, and that's a very long, it should not be a long subway journey, but it is. And I wrote a lot of the book on that because, when you're in the subway, you just want to not look at anything else outside of you, and you just go deep into the work. So actually, that can be a really good place to write. I do tell people, do not wait for long spurts because with all of us, we don't have that time. So, but yeah, taking those 20, 30-minute chunks of time helped me finish the book. And I love novels, so I knew I wanted to be. And just one last thing is the next novel, the sequel to this, when I was living through those experiences, which were, being a disowned youth, homeless, traveling around the country on the Greyhound. At that time, to survive that moment, I would say to myself, I'm going to write about this one day. Like, I would storify it, narratize it.
That works.
In my head, because then I was like, I'll just make this into a book one day. And I still haven't written that book yet, but that will come next. Hello, I know you've been waiting.
No, it's okay. So this is a question for both of you, but so I'm an Indian American, and right now I go to a very, the epitome of a liberal arts college, and I'm an English major, and growing up, there's a stereotype of South Asian families and just Asian families in general, just wanting their kids to become doctors, lawyers, things like that. I'm very lucky to have my parents they wanted me to do whatever I wanted to do, and since middle school I read Shakespeare for the first time, and I knew that I wanted to do English. But unfortunately, I was met with a lot of negativity from family members and people around me that told me that English wasn't enough. The arts weren't enough. And even at a liberal arts school, I'm finding that a lot of my peers kind of look down on me and other humanities majors as being less than STEM. Is there any advice that both of you would give to students who, because I know a lot of kids who unfortunately they've wanted to do majors like English and their parents basically told them no. And I feel like that's them being deprived of something really beautiful. Is there anything that you guys would like to say for kids right now who are wanting to explore the arts and they're hearing from the outside world that that's not enough to base a career on or life on?
I mean, I have a lot. I mean, when people say it's not enough, they're talking about purely capitalist viewpoint on life. You know, a purely capitalist, all about making money view on life. So you can just call them out on that. And just yes. And you know, but I mean, but also like you almost don't have to. I mean, I think the one thing I realize is like I will never convince my family to see the world the way that I see it, but I do feel like I have just one life, and I do feel that this is the only one I have, and this is the one that I have to do with to live it most authentically, whatever that means. But I do feel that by being a writer, I have had such a rich, incredible, beautiful life. I've traveled to places I never thought I know I don't come to DC a lot, but I've traveled to other places. You know, I've traveled like around the world. I've met people. I've just had such a life that's so full. But I think that it's if you can just if you can take care of yourself, oh God, I have so much to say about this. Like, but it's hard to know. But ultimately, it is your life, and I think that if you can take care of yourself financially, and take money out of the equation, it is enough. It's more than enough. And I do want to say, because I think that what's hinted at in the beginning of your piece is this idea of being a part of a model minority, and I really want to recommend this book to everyone. It's called The Karma of Brown Folk, and South Asians were called model minorities as a form of anti-blackness. We are the model minority because then who's the non-model minority? And this entire myth, this horrifying myth of what the model minority is based on anti-blackness. It's based on this horrific immigration policy that only allowed in people of a certain education and wouldn't let other people in. That led to the brain drain of, I mean, you just have to feel, you don't have to explain it to them, but as long as you know this is where it's coming from, it'll be a lot easier to make your life decisions. Like, it's based on racist immigration policies, it's based on anti-blackness, it's based on capitalism, you know, and it's just, it's bullshit, honestly. And if you just call bullshit for what it is and then live your life and make enough money to support yourself and others, if you need to, you can make money all kinds of ways. You can work at a bookstore. You can, I mean, you can. I know. You can do all kinds of things. But I have a very beautiful life right now, and it's come from being an English major. So if that helps, and we can talk more. Yeah. Okay. About it.
I think I agree. I think that it starts when children when they're very young, you know, and it's a form of bullying. Mm-hmm. You know, that's not a good enough idea. You're not good enough. You should do this. You should do that. It's the same as saying, you know, you're a queer kid, so you're not worth anything. It's like you're an overweight child. You're not worth anything. It's all bullying, and one hopes that there are people with some power, adults around those children who can step in and take up for them. I hope a whole community and whole families aren't against these children, but it's in the, I write in the very first part of my book that there are some things I wish I'd known when I was a child. It would have made all the difference. And one of those is that bullies are paper predators who have no more power over you than you yourself give them. And once you realize that, it's as if a wind just comes and lifts them and takes them away. It's simplified, but I really believe that if a child can believe that they have intrinsic value and what these people think about them is worthless. It's only what they think about themselves that matters. And then being an English major seems like an easy thing to do. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But they need allies, they need champions, and it's our job to do that for them. That's the answer, I think, to help them from an early age.
Thank you.
It's true. It is bullying.
Any other questions? I think, we have one more.
Oh, yeah.
Would you talk a little bit about your religious faith and the rhythm, maybe, that it felt like there was a rhythm in all of the rituals that you were doing that your mother was demanding, or that the character's mother was demanding, but it felt like it supported you in ways. Would you talk about that and maybe even how it connects with your writing?
Yeah. Oh, so you read the book? It
Yeah,
sounds like
yeah.
okay. I was gonna say there's a lot of praying in the book. There's a lot of praying. So I mean, I grew up praying 5 times a day, and I was very much like, sometimes I say this book is like a "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret" for Muslim girls, because throughout the chapters after she prays, she's like talking to Allah and always feels, as I do, an unconditional love from a divine source. I mean, I always felt that ever since I was young. When I would pray, even though I was doing prayers as I was taught, but at the end of every prayer, you get a little one-on-one time with God. And so I would always take full advantage of that and just unburden myself. And I always just felt divine love. I always just felt it ever since I was really young. And I think that for many years, I definitely had some lost years. And in terms of like addictions and all the things that queer people can be susceptible to, and all those things. And then I feel that recently, and especially with my father passing away, I've been praying again, and I feel just this immediate kind of meditative state that I enter when I pray. And I do feel that any kind of prayer is a form of meditation and a way for us to then again leave this material world, because we're all going to leave it anyway. We're going to leave it hopefully in a dignified way, but I just think that I don't know, prayer is just a way to immediately see something beyond all this, the matrix. And so I do think that the rhythm of the book and my poetry comes from the rhythm of the Quran, because I grew up reading the Quran all the time, every day, multiple times a day. So there is a rhythm that I think also feels familiar to people when they read the book.
Well, Bushra, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to Politics and Prose, and thank you to all of you. And if you'll stay in your seat for just a minute, we want to get a selfie with all of you in it. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's
we
a
love
great
that.
idea.
Okay, I've got my camera ready.
Okay.
It'll take no time at all.
Should they do a certain...
We'll turn this way.
And can we fit?
We can fit, of course we can fit.
Okay. I'm still holding this mic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming on. Thank you all once again. The books can be purchased